acknowledge from the Town Council Greg Stokes and Tom Kinsler, Tom Serrard from the Board of Education, Chief Alimo from Thompsonville Fire District, Jack Sheridan, President of the Taxpayers Association, Dominic Alimo, he's a fire commissioner in Thompsonville and also the vice chairman of the town committee, and Mary Ann Turner, chairman of the Enfield Republican Town Committee. And did I miss anybody? Okay. It is really an honor to have the kickoff meeting of Senator McKinney's listening tour starting up here in North Central Connecticut and Enfield. As Mary Ann points out, a lot of folks sort of forget us up here, but Senator McKinney never forgets us up here, and he's always been very helpful, very thoughtful. He knows exactly what's going on up in North Central Connecticut. Briefly, he's in his 8th term. His dad was an extremely highly regarded congressman from down that sort of Fairfield County way from 1971 to 1987. His son, the youngest son of all the kids, is following his dad's footsteps a little bit by raising to the rank of minority leader in our Senate caucus. He's been that since I think around 2007. He also has a passion for housing issues, transportation issues, and he studies each and every bill that comes before us in the Senate. I could say an awful lot more about him, but he would then get a hook and drag me off. He said, keep it under 30 seconds, and I've already gone well beyond that. But above and beyond the fact that I think he's a fabulous leader of our caucus, probably the best leader I've ever had, I consider him a good friend and someone that I could turn to regarding pretty much anything. So without further ado, Senator John McKinney.
Thank you, John. And John was being kind. He said, I know what's happening in North Central Connecticut. I do because John keeps me informed. And for many years, he's done a great job as your state senator. And it's certainly a pleasure and an honor to serve in the caucus with him. First, thank you all for coming out tonight. I know how busy we all are with our lives, whether you're volunteering or serving on a town board or just with your families. And I've got 3 kids, so tonight's a rare night that I'm not at some function or game or something. So I know how busy you are, so thank you. As John mentioned, I'm the minority leader. That means I'm the Republican leader in the state Senate. We have, since I first became the Republican leader in 2007, always believed that if the Democrats who are in the majority are passing a budget that we disagree with, it's our obligation to do more than just say no. It's our obligation to present a better way, a different way that we believe we should budget and spend for the state of Connecticut. In order to do that, I think the best thing you can do is to inform everybody about what we are doing, where we spend our money, where's our money come from, where's our money going. So what I thought I'd do with you tonight, as briefly as we can, is just to go through you a little bit about our state budget, just sort of some of the basics. And then John and I would love to just engage in a conversation and answer any and all questions you have about the budget. We've got a great number of folks who work with us and make us look good up in Hartford. So if there is a question that we can't answer, they probably can. And if none of us can answer it, we'll take down your name and contact information and make sure we can get back to you as soon as possible with an answer. I've always said, my last comment before we go on the slide, I've always said that very little to no good ideas start at the state capitol. They always start out in our communities with good elected representatives listening to the people they represent. And some of the best ideas that I've brought to the Capitol have been ideas that local business owners or public servants or others call me or talk to me anywhere and say, listen, why aren't you doing something like this? So it's very instructive and helpful to us to listen to you about what you're hearing and seeing in your day-to-day lives, how the economy, how the budget are impacting you. That helps us shape public policy. So with that, let me just go quickly to the first slide. This is the first slide for a reason. It is startling. If you look at the 3 lines that we have, the blue line is the population growth in the state of Connecticut. And as you can see, the population has remained relatively steady over the last couple of decades. If you look at the green line shows inflation. Now we've picked 1987. there's no reason for that date other than to take a broad historical look. A lot of times I've done this. We've started with 1991, which was the institution of the income tax, which was not the best moment in our state's history, that's for sure. The green line shows inflation growth, and that's inflation that affects all of us, whether it's your home budget or your local business budget. And the red line reflects state spending. And again, from 1987, but you can pick any date and time, state spending has skyrocketed while our population has remained relatively steady and our spending has been well in excess of inflation. Let's go to the next slide. The next slide gives you a very broad overview where our money comes from. And again, as you can see, the largest chunk of our money, 39%, comes from the income tax, 19% from the sales tax. Obviously, you can see there's 3% from gambling. That number obviously has been shrinking, and 17% from federal revenue. That money may also be shrinking in the future. Why don't we go to the next slide? The next slide shows you in broad categories where our money goes. Again, if you look down in the bottom left, you'll see social services. 22% is the largest piece of our spending pie, which when we start to talk about can you spend less money, where do you spend less money, you have to go where you spend the most because that's where the greatest savings are. You can also see education is not far behind at 21%. Just a note that education spending includes our colleges and universities, not just our local education cost-sharing formula that the state gives to our towns and cities for their local education costs. And the last thing I want to point out to you is the repayment of debt at 11%. What that means is 11 cents of every dollar we spend goes to pay off our bonded indebtedness. And in Connecticut, we have the distinction of having the highest per capita debt of all 50 states in the country, and that's something we're obviously very proud of. We take a look at the next slide. Just in comparison, from transitioning from one administration to the next, FY11 is our fiscal year 2011 budget. In case you don't know, our budgets don't work on a calendar. They work on a fiscal year, which starts on July 1st and ends on June 30th. And you can see in the last year under Governor Rell, we were spending $19.169 billion. The first year of Governor Malloy, that spending increased to just over $20 billion. Revenue increased as well, and our bonding has gone up over $262 million. That, of course, was in face of what was a $3.5 billion deficit that existed when Governor Malloy took office. Let's take a look at the next one. The next one shows you fiscal year 13, which is what we're in right now. So fiscal year, when you see fiscal year FY13, that's the current budget year we have, which ends on June 30th. And we are currently dealing with an estimated deficit of $128 million. That's after the legislature, Republicans and Democrats, worked together on a deficit mitigation package. We're currently, obviously, in March, so we're close to the fourth quarter allotments of our state spending. That means if we don't get together now, and unfortunately there are no interested parties other than us in getting together now to look at where we can cut our spending in the fourth quarter, we will end the year with a budget deficit, which can be solved only two ways since you can no longer cut spending. That is with borrowing to cover your operating expenses or tax increases that would be imposed retroactively. And then you see in FY14, FY15, what we are projecting for the two budget years that we are currently in session to come up with a biennial budget. We're looking at a cumulative budget deficit over those 2 years of $2.5 billion. Now, again, when Governor Malloy came into office, he faced a $3.5 billion budget deficit. Not his fault. He didn't create it. His solution was the largest tax increase in our history, which was intended to solve the problem, as I think this slide shows. With a $2.5 billion budget deficit, the problem was not solved. If you take a look just quickly at the next slide, you see what Governor Malloy has proposed for the current year and the next 2 years. This was, so the numbers that you see on FY14 and FY15 are the budget numbers that the governor proposed to the legislature in February. Our Appropriations Committee, Democrats, Republicans, and the Senate and the House are currently having public hearings and meetings on the governor's proposed budget. But what I find to be most shocking, and that's why, surprise, we put them in red, is that the governor's budget proposes a spending increase of $1.8 billion over 2 years, which amounts to a 9.64% spending increase in our general fund. Take a look at the next slide. As I'm sure you're aware, we do have a constitutional spending cap. That was an amendment to our state constitution passed by over 80% of the people in Connecticut after the income tax was first passed in 1991. Governor Malloy's budget exceeds the spending cap in 2014 by $465 million and in 2015 by $690 million. One might ask, as I did, how does the governor, who's constitutionally mandated to have a budget that is balanced and comes under the spending cap, propose a budget that exceeds the spending cap by over $1 billion in 2 years? The governor's own budget proposal attempts to redefine the spending cap, which is something that we're certainly going to have a debate on in the legislature. The spending cap has been perhaps one of the saving graces in even further spending increases over the state. The next slide here is another part of the governor's budget proposal, which is borrowing money to cover operating expenses. He has several different proposals in there. The first would be a $750 million bond allocation to cover the state's cash flow problem. The state has, I think on 2 occasions every year, goes out to the market and sells general obligation bonds. A lot of times we've used that money, which we sell to the market for capital projects, to supplement our cash flow, and then as tax revenue comes in, move it back to the capital projects. At some point, we're going to run into real trouble, and we have. And our cash flow is so low that the governor's proposing to borrow $750 million just to cover cash flow. That will result, as you can see, in $186 million in interest expenses. The other thing that he's proposed to do in his budget is to extend by 2 years previous borrowing done to solve the last budget deficit, and by which we were supposed to have paid off last time. We delayed that $220-something million payment. He's proposed to push it out for another 2 years before we pay off that borrowing. That will result in an additional $31 million in interest payment. And that is all money that we borrowed that covered 1 year's operating expenses 3 years ago. If you take a look at the next slide, you'll see some of things that we call other budget details. And there's a couple things I want to point out here, especially given the fact that we're in Enfield. And the first is the second bullet point down from the top that is captioned a $74.8 million raid on the Special Transportation Fund. The legislature and the Transportation Committee are having hearings about border tolls. And there are bills that are running through the legislature to institute border tolls. Not surprisingly, a lot of the legislatures who are supportive of border tolls live nowhere near the borders of the state of Connecticut. The argument is we have billions of dollars of roads and bridges that need to be repaired. That's factually correct. And not enough money to pay for it. I would argue that's not factually correct. Every year that I've been in the legislature, and I'm serving in my 15th year, we've taken money that was supposed to be in the Special Transportation Fund, and we've put it in the general fund. The gas tax, the oil tax, all of that money that was put aside in the Special Transportation Fund, and some of you may recall the reason why the state created a special fund for transportation was in the early to mid-1980s, the Mianus River Bridge in Greenwich collapsed, the lane collapsed, and it was because of just years of decay and lack of maintenance in our bridges in Connecticut. And they said, we need to make sure that the politicians will put the money where it needs to go in terms of our road and bridge repair, so this will never happen again. This is the second year in a row Governor Malloy's taken money out of the Special Transportation Fund and put it into our general fund. So when people say to you, we need tolls so we have more revenue, I would say to you, if you're opposed to border tolls, and I would think in Enfield you may be, that why don't you spend all of the money that was intended to be spent in the transportation fund first. Second, I would also argue, why don't you stop engaging in $500 million projects, which is a busway from New Britain to Hartford, and put that money into fixing our bridges and our roads first. So I wanted to point that out. The second one I wanted to point out is the fact that the governor's budget includes $125 million to fund salary increases for state employees. It's part of the CBAC deal the governor has. And the third point is briefly that one of the governor's budget spending reductions is a $550 million reduction to hospitals, something we're going to have to take a serious look at as to whether or not we're going to have hospitals that are going to survive financially. If we take a look at the next slide, and this is probably the least talked about issue in Connecticut, and beyond everything I've shown you about our current budget and the next 2-year budget, probably significantly more important. And that is right now we have an unfunded pension liability that we owe people who've earned their pensions to the tune of $66 billion. We spend about $20 billion a year, yet our liabilities are $66 billion. That's a significant problem that we don't have a handle on. And one of the dirty little secrets is that that $66 million is probably closer to 80. We assume a rate of return on our pension funds of 8.25%. If you know anybody who's made 8.25% over the last 5 years, please tell them to come see me. I'd like to hire them to invest some of our money for us. But the reality is we're not getting that recovery, but we assume it. Why do we assume that 8.25%? So we can actually put less money into our pension fund and put more money into other things. We avoid making difficult decisions. Take a look at the next. The next one describes very briefly the governor's proposal to, in part, eliminate the car tax. Now, Governor Rell had a proposal to eliminate the car tax, which was very different than Governor Malloy's. Governor Malloy does not propose eliminating the car tax in total. He only proposed exempting the first $20,000. So if you have a car that has a Blue Book value of roughly $28,000 or less, you'll pay no car tax. But for your town or city, they're still going to have to do the administration and collecting and sending out of car taxes for any car that has a Blue Book value in excess of $28,000. Now, what Governor Malloy does differently than Governor Rell actually transferred money from the state to the towns to make up for the loss of the car tax. Governor Malloy does not do that. So it's about $632 million. That is the car tax statewide that municipalities will have to make up. There'll be nothing coming from the state, which means you're basically going to transfer all of that money onto your residential and commercial property taxpayers. Take a look at the next two slides. I brought these slides especially for Senator Kissel. This essentially shows some of the impacts from the vehicle tax on Enfield and surrounding towns. So Enfield has $7.1 million in what it would not get from the car tax. Windsor Locks, $5 million. Windsor, $5 million, $5.5 million. Take a look at the next slide. And we see other changes to municipal revenue. One of the things that, and I'll try to be kind, is less than straightforward in the governor's budget, is that he said, I'm going to keep municipalities whole. They're going to get as much money as they got last year. Now, let's put the car tax issue to the side. What he does is he puts more money in the education cost-sharing formula, takes less money in your pilot, town-owned property, or your LOCIP. So, for example, if Enfield was getting $100 from the state of Connecticut, they're still going to get $100, but instead of 50 going to education and 50 coming from state-owned pilot, I'm using simple numbers, obviously, it might be 75 coming from education and 25 coming from the other. Here's the problem with that. He takes money out of the state-owned property pilot, which now, if you're in Senator Kissel's district, is a significant chunk of money from the state because of all the prisons. And the district I represent includes Newtown, which is home to Garner Correctional Facility. So John and I stand shoulder to shoulder on a lot of the issues related to towns that are hosts to prisons. He takes that money and he puts it into LOSIP, which is bonding instead of operating, which is, I think, not responsible. But it's also money that the town can't use for anything it wants to. So what he's doing is shifting money from a pot that the town can use for anything it wants to a pot where the state government directs where the town can spend the money. I would argue that's not actually making our towns and cities whole, and is going to be a real hardship on a lot of towns and cities. Why don't we take a look at the next slide? I probably could have had another 4 or 5 slides which talk about all of the different agencies, organizations, studies, groups that have ranked Connecticut, whether it's the Tax Foundation, whether it's the American Petroleum Institute, or others. But the bottom line is that we have the largest per capita debt in the country. We have, by percentage, one of the largest unfunded pension liabilities. And whichever group it is looking at it, when they look at Connecticut as a place to do business, we generally rank somewhere between 43rd and 50th. And that's sadly why we see so many business owners looking at picking up and moving outside the state. Let's see if there's another slide. I think that's the last slide, correct? I actually did that a little bit quicker than I thought because I want to make sure we get to the questions. John, do you want to, Senator Kissel, do you want to make any comments before we just take questions?
I did miss one person. I think that's Carl Schissel back there.
It is.
And former House Chairman of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding, so we're honored to have you here, Carl.
Carl actually knows the budget better than the 2 state senators you have before you. So if you see me looking in the back for an answer to the question, it's because of Carl. But Carl, thank you for all your service, because I was first elected in 1998, and people who've been there longer than me, and there've been a lot, continue to talk about Carl Schissel, and your legacy is a very strong one. So what I'd like to do, what we'd like to do, is just, if you want, I think we have a microphone here, but I don't think we need it. So, and we have a, okay. I guess we need the microphones for people who are taping. So raise your hand, we'll get a mic to you. Why don't you introduce yourselves and ask the question, and Senator Kissel and I will give it the best shot.
Hey, John. Tom Kinsley, I'm the town council here in Enfield. My question is one of trying to get education out there like we're doing tonight, but not just to little pockets of people. Because if what you just showed on the screen was faced by any household, they would immediately go fix that problem. Where here in the state, there's a lot of people with the apathy of not knowing what's going on, not in touch with it, and they need to know. Specifically here in Enfield, we're on your sheet. We're going to look to have to make up for about $2.8 million on the town side, and be given some of that money given to the school system to help increase them. However, we've got to go find $2.8 million, $2.7 million. And I don't think that the public in general has any idea of some of the little things that you have on your presentation, that if they knew. So my question is, how do we get this out through the media in a way that doesn't put people to sleep and sets off the proper red alerts, so that, you know, the people can speak, and then you can have support for maybe some of the ideas you have? Well,
Tom, thank you. And I'll try it quickly, and then I'll let John step in. First, thankfully, I don't think anybody fell asleep during that presentation. So it's difficult. You know, look, we know how busy you are, especially in this economy when unemployment about 9%. People are struggling. Small business owners are working longer and harder than they ever had. It's difficult to pay attention to everything that's happening in your state government. A lot of us, especially with kids, are more focused on local issues, too, about what's happening in our towns. I think we have a friend in a lot of our mayors and first selectmen across the state who look at this budget and say that the governor's rhetoric does not match the numbers, that he has not kept our towns and cities whole, that this will result in either significant cuts in services or residential property tax increases. And as our towns across the state are all going through their local budget process. We're getting that message out better than we usually do. But forums like this, you know, John does Senator on Your Sidewalk a lot, and you know, it's just a constant, you know, 20 people at a time. It is difficult, but it's the only way to do it. Is just continue to get the message out, and you know, go to your local town budget meetings and ask the first selectman or the mayor, how are you going to address the fact that, you know, the governor's proposed to do away with the car tax or something like that. I've heard some first selectmen say that they've put 3 budgets together based on potential outcomes from the governor's budget, which is also, I think, a waste of time on their parts. Not to criticize them, but they shouldn't have to do that. Do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think that Senator McKinney said it all. But I think, you know, that's our job as reps and senators, is to constantly be proactive. So that's why, you know, email blasts, mailings to people's homes, trying to elevate this issue. But if you go and you start talking to your neighbors and friends, then that helps get the ball rolling as well. I mean, Mayor Copen, who has a mayor's meeting this evening, has said the governor's budget will be about a $10 million hit. That's huge. That's huge. And all of the towns are going to suffer. So it's trench warfare.
And I will say just a last comment. Make sure I don't talk as much and listen. But one of the reasons why we want to start with just here's some facts and figures is because we don't even use the same language. The governor stood up before the legislature and was on TV across the state of Connecticut and said, I'm cutting spending $1.8 billion. And I'm here before you showing you numbers that say he's increasing spending $1.8 billion. Well, I mean, what does that mean? And the best way I can tell you that is, you know, I've got 3 kids, they eat a lot. If I'm spending, you know, $100 a week at Stop and Shop, and I'm doing my budget for next week and next year, and I realize that my kids are growing, I've now got 2 in high school, I'm going to need to spend about $125 a week to feed them, but I can't afford $125 a week. But coupons and savings and things, I can probably get away with saving, you know, spending $110 a week. And I spend $110 a week. You tell me, have I increased spending $10 or have I cut spending $15? I'm being honest. What have I done? Okay, but in Hartford, okay, what the governor says is that we want to spend $3.6 billion more over the next 2 years than we currently spend. But since we're only going to spend $1.8 billion more, I've cut spending. That's not a partisan comment of mine. That's fact. They work off what they call a current services budget, which is this is what we wish we could spend. What household does that? What small business person does that? So we need to make sure we're still talking about the same terms. This gentleman and then this gentleman right here.
Jack Sheridan. I have a couple of questions actually. One is on the way the various towns in the state report their school spending and the cost per student. And it needs to be, I think that's one of the big problems with the way it's reported now, is that they don't have a standardized system for all towns. And so some towns have buildings included and maintenance included, and some have transportation and some don't. And I think that's a big disparity in the way the money is distributed back to the towns. My numbers, when I do them for the town, always come up significantly higher, and I'm going from their audit books. So it's just a matter of dividing the students by the numbers, and it comes out significantly higher. So there's something wrong with the way we report it. And like I said, I've looked through the book and know that the various towns report differently because I've checked with them. The other thing is and I don't remember what they call education cost sharing, but it's the commitment that you make. You can't spend lower.
The MBR, the minimum budget requirement.
That's something that I think is way off the mark too, because we keep losing students every year, significant amount, 200-300 a year, and yet we still have to spend the same amount we spent in the previous year. And even though we're combining high schools, we're still not saving any money with that project. We've still got just as many teachers as we had before. So I don't know how we resolve all of that. If the state is as broke as you just said, and I think we all know that, then you're still spending money in places that, in my opinion, doesn't need to be spent.
And Jack, two good questions. Let me take the second one first. With respect to the minimum budget requirement, that was passed years ago because of a fear that in larger cities, they were actually not spending the money that the state was giving them for the ECS formula, the education cost sharing formula, on education. So, for example, if Bridgeport was given X amount, our concern was that they were even spending less than that on education and using the education money for other services in the city. And people wanted to make sure that in their towns and cities, the money that the state gave you for education went to education. The problem is it's actually worked as a punishment to towns if you have decreasing enrollment, or if you want to make tough decisions to spend less money. And a lot of us have tried over the last couple of years to either do away with or modify the MBR. We've had some resistance. The best I can tell you is we're going to continue to look at. There have been slight modifications to the MBR, but not nearly enough. We should not have a financial punishment if a town is willing to make efficiencies. Or if, two towns wanted to get together and pool their purchasing or pool their administrative staff or do things that could be possible to cost less, there should not be a punishment in that. With respect to the per pupil formula, I'll have to look to see how towns do it differently. I know, in my hometown of Fairfield, we actually had to tear down a school because of toxic mold that existed. And a lot of that was because the Board of Ed, and looking at where they spent their money, decided not to put money into building maintenance, much like the state didn't put money into bridge maintenance, and you end up paying a lot more in the long run. But I would say to you that one of the things John and I have fought for in the Senate, again, so far unsuccessfully, is that during certain times the state should be auditing all of our towns to make sure. Remember, this is all our tax money that you send to Hartford and we send back, which is an issue in and of itself. And we need to make sure that's being spent the way it's supposed to be being spent. And I think at some point we can get an audit of all our municipalities. I'll give you one quick story. Years ago, Governor Ralph gave money to organization in the city of Bridgeport that was raising private money to audit the Bridgeport Board of Education. And I'll say that my brother's a proud employee of them, been a teacher in Bridgeport for over 20 years. But at the time, this was years ago, the former superintendent couldn't answer this question. How many employees do you have working for you for the Bridgeport Board of Education? And it's not that he couldn't say, I'll get back to you with an answer. He couldn't answer it because he didn't know. So, it's our money. It's all of your money. We need to make sure our towns are held somewhat accountable for how that money is spent. Yes, sir.
Hi, Bill Hossley, Town Committee. Thank you, Senator McKinney, for spending your evening with us. One could go.
John's buying me dinner, so
Oh, there we
good.
go.
It all works.
Then it's even. But one could spend all night and won't identifying little spending areas that are bewildering to people who are outside the culture. But just reading the paper, in fact, just reading today's paper, last 2 years ago, GOP candidate for governor Oz Griebel wrote a big editorial strongly advocating $1.5 billion investment in Yukon. And I think the assumptions on these spending goals aren't even discussed half the time. The editorials, they don't say, look, if we do this, the students will stick around. I don't see students from Yale deciding to stay in Connecticut just because they got a degree here, any more than they would at UConn. So why spend $1.5 billion on this assumption? It's like in an economy that is flat and where there is no population growth.
Right. Well, it's a good question, and if any of you haven't heard, Governor Malloy recently came out with a proposal. I think he's calling Next Generation Yukon. Is that the title of his proposal? It's a $1.5 billion proposal. He's not the first governor to do that. The previous previous three governors have done close to $2.5 billion on Yukon, and it's a fantastic state university. There are a couple issues I have, though, that we need to look at. First, in the governor's budget and in the years that go forward, nowhere has he taken a look at the impact of that $1.5 billion in capital in infrastructure investment. What are the long-term, what are the immediate costs of additional professors and employees? What are their long-term pension and health care costs to the state of Connecticut? That's not in any budget or any numbers he's proposed. The second thing is he hasn't said, I'm going to prioritize, UConn's important, let's spend $1.5 billion, but I'm going to spend less money over here. One of the things that we do is when we look at our borrowing, the governor talked about looking at borrowing on a calendar year. And in his first year, he said, I'm not going to spend more than $1.4 billion. And he did not. He spent just under $1.4 billion. This year, asked how much they expected to spend, the governor's budget director said about $1.8 billion. That's a $400 million increase, quick math, roughly over 20% increase in our borrowing when we already have the highest per capita debt, and 11 cents in every dollar goes to pay off the debt. So I think we'll have a debate as to whether this is important and necessary for UConn, but we can't have it in a vacuum. We have to consider its impacts on the budget, consider its impacts on our borrowing, and we also need to consider its impact on the rest of the higher education system in Connecticut. Because as soon as you say you're going to spend $1.5 billion at UConn, Southern Connecticut, Central, WestConn, EastConn, the hands go up saying, we're next, we're next. And then after that, you've got our community colleges, which are all, at the end of the day, we need to make sure that for Connecticut kids, for my 3 kids, we have quality, affordable higher education that they can go to if they want to, because we know if they go there, most likely they're going to stay here and want to live here. I don't know if there's opportunities. Well, that's right, and that's a big issue. Correct.
Been waiting, and then maybe the gentleman behind him.
Hi,
Sure. This side over here can feel free to ask questions too. So,
Jeff from Southfield. I just wanted to, after listening to this and watching the slide presentation, this is about the biggest colossal mess I've ever seen. I have a few comments and then questions. I think that the tiny, incremental, I think non-impactful discussions and then decisions made at the state level have continued to perpetuate this. And I would offer up a suggestion, like other states that are really proactive. Number one, having a state income tax at 6% is ridiculous. Why can't you cut that in half? I wouldn't mind paying something, but 6%? And another thing, how about a referendum? California has referendums where, if this ridiculous idea about this bus to nowhere that Governor Malloy proposed, if we had the opportunity as citizens of the United States in the state of Connecticut to stand up and vote on it, we would have shut that down. I mean, there's so much wasteful spending. I'd like to know what kind of concrete, really concrete ideas that you're going to propose and clarion call, and I respectfully disagree with Senator Kissel that the only way you can do it is by going to these town meetings and online. I think that the mainstream media has clearly abrogated their responsibilities. They should be reporting on this, seeking out the truth, and reporting the truth to the American people, especially here in the state of Connecticut, on what's going on. Because you didn't say it, but clearly you explained to it. The way that the governor explained his tax cut was a lie, and calling a spade and just doing it. And I think that when I look also at the social service programs, that is so far out of control. We are paying for people to bleed into our country and suck off of us taxpayers just ad infinitum. And I think it's horrendous that nobody's standing up because of political correctness and doing what's right and shutting that down. And I speak as a father of a special needs daughter who receives some of those services where they're really needed. I'm talking about the massive waste and fraud that's going on with the social service programs where people are taking advantage of it and nobody's doing a thing about it.
well, do you say it was Jeff?
And I apologize for my
That's
tone.
all right. Look,
I'm angry.
It's all right. If you're frustrated and angry, share it, express it. If we could go to slide 3, just quick. Well, you don't have to go to slide 3. That's all right. Because you mentioned social services, and you make a fair point. Well, what are we going to do? And again, if you want to cut the budget, beyond, we're going to cut $1 million here, $1 million there. If you want to make a real impact, you have to go where you spend the money. And social programs is where we spend the most money. 22. Yeah, 22% of $20 billion. Here's what I've been advocating for too many years. Unfortunately, since I'm in the minority, everything I told you I'm advocating for has been somewhat unsuccessful at time. But we are, as Connecticut, as a state, we are what's known as a dual delivery state for social services. The state delivers and provides services, and we also have a lot of nonprofit organizations, private organizations, throughout our state, in all of our communities, that provide the same or very similar services to the elderly, to the disabled, in the full range of spectrum. On average, those nonprofit organizations deliver services for 50 to 60 cents on the dollar of what it costs the state. So here's an easy solution. Let's get the state out of the business of delivering social services, fund our nonprofit agencies, and allow them to care for the people. And I think, and I say this with no disrespect to hardworking state employees, but I think our nonprofit organizations not only can do it for less, but they can actually do it more compassionately, because those nonprofits are made up of all of us. We've all at one point in time, or you know neighbors who served on boards, who've worked in nonprofits, and they have employees who live in the communities who are dedicated towards helping these people. You can't do that overnight, but you can transition to that point where at the end of the day, you can probably save $350 to $500 million a year. Now, that's the biggest proposal in terms of saving money. That does not change the services. We haven't cut services. We've just changed the delivery model. And I'll give you one example, because this will get you mad if you're not already. Connecticut is the only state, the last state in New England, that has a state-owned and run hospital for severely mentally ill kids. These are kids who absolutely need services, okay? Nobody believes they shouldn't have services. Why don't you take a guess at how much it costs us as taxpayers to care for one child per year? Just take a guess. $70,000. Anybody else want to guess? $250,000? That's a lot. For one kid per year? It's $1 million. $1 million. And that doesn't come from John McKinney or John Kissel. It comes from Gene Milstein, our former child advocate, who, trust me, isn't going to Republican rallies, okay? $1 million per year per child at Riverview Hospital. All of the costs that go involved, all of the costs, from pension, benefits, health care, costs. And so I met with an individual who worked for the former Holbrook Hospital in Westport, which was taken over by the St. Vincent's Health System. He came from New Jersey. He's no longer at Holbrook, but he came from New Jersey. And he had closed down the New Jersey system and worked to contract out to private hospitals and nonprofit hospitals. Again, when I say private, we're not talking about corporations trying to make money. We're talking about nonprofit organizations that are private because they're not state employees. And he said, we can do this at our facility for roughly half of that, $450,000, $500,000 per child. Still a lot of money per child. But if you have 80 to 100 kids at the hospital, what's 80 times 500,000? That's $40 million you save just by closing down that state hospital. Could probably get a couple $1 million for selling it too, but just for closing down that hospital and having these kids cared for in private institutions. That's the type of decision and fundamental change we have to make. And unfortunately, as long as we have state employee union leadership saying you can't make any changes to give services that we provide to nonprofit organizations, we won't get anything done. Sorry, that was a much longer answer, but the gentleman in the yellow, and excuse me, ma'am, did you in the green, did you have a question? Next.
To New Britain, it seems like we don't even have a say in that. It's just going through. It's costing a ton of money for all of the studies that say who would use it, mostly who wouldn't use it. I am really kind of befuddled as to why all that money's being sunken in there when we're drowning.
Hey, when you said you wanted to have a vote, I put in bills till the cows came home for initiative and referenda. The majority party says our initiative and referenda are the elections every 2 years. Suck it up. So even up in Massachusetts, they have referenda on different issues. And in fact, that's why when they wanted to have their alcohol tax, the people said, no, we don't really want to have that. and they voted it down. On the busway, you're not going. There's not one person in our caucus I think supports the busway at all, and we actually have a champion in Senator Markley, who put forward amendment after amendment after amendment last year, trying to stop the busway, and it was voted. Each of these amendments were voted down on party line votes. I mean, he even tacked on amendments on their proposal to have tolls, which they actually snuck in a little toll bill last cycle if it was a road to finish a road downstate. Then the new issue now is the border tolls, as Senator McKinney said. So we hear you loud and clear. But I think one person came up with the idea regarding the busway, and that's Governor Malloy.
And so, before I answer your question, I'm not often at a loss for words. Describing the busway, I am. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, people will tell you most of the money we spend on transportation comes from the federal government, and we wouldn't have gotten this money from the federal government if it weren't for the busway. Well, first of all, that's fine because it's our tax dollars going to the federal government anyways. But it's also not true because of the $560-something million cost. Somewhere in the neighborhood, and I apologize, I don't have that number exactly right, but somewhere around $150 million we're getting from the federal government that we can spend on any transportation project we want. The governor's chosen, the Democrats in the legislature have chosen to spend it on the busway. Again, go back to the issue of we need border tolls because we don't have enough money for our bridges. There's $74 million he's taking out of the budget. There's $150 million that's going to the busway. And we haven't even talked about the annual operating subsidy the state will pay to keep the busway going. And I would suggest to you that there is no chance we will get the ridership when it's built that the governor's building into his assumptions. Not even close, which means our subsidy, our annual cost, is going to be much higher than what we're predicting. And that money, the millions of dollars a year, hasn't been accounted for. And also, I would argue, could go to fix bridges rather than more money for tolls. Sir, I apologize,
Yeah,
but
no, it's okay.
you're up.
Yeah, first up, thank you, Senator McKinney, for coming out, obviously communicating to us what's going on. I really appreciate it. I'm sure all of us really appreciate it as well. You know, it's interesting. Tomorrow, I'm a high school teacher, and tomorrow I got to look at my students, and the next day I got to look at my students. And over this weekend, I'm going to look at my 4 nephews and 2 nieces. And the truth is, can't say it to them, they don't have a future. They don't. And I would love to placate it. I would love to come up with some fantasy kind of story about how there's going to be money, how there's going to be opportunities, how there are going to be jobs to have and families of their own. But it's amazing looking at what I see up there on this board, whether it be through the spending, whether it be through the whole philosophical approach behind the governor in general. It's just one of those moments that I know I'll experience tomorrow, I'll experience this weekend, of course, many times, and just realize just if this continues, there isn't going to be a future. And when I mean future, I don't mean entitlements, I mean opportunity.
Well,
Real solid opportunities. So I guess first off, obviously, that's my kind of comment to make. And I don't know if anyone else here has, obviously, many people obviously have families. But it's just amazing. Again, thank you for tonight for making that point. Secondly, is there any way, given I know the politics in the Capitol today, that there can be a serious debate between you and the governor? Because as much as I see this as a financial kind of crisis, I also, or battle, I personally see it as a philosophical battle, as something that is not just in numbers, but it is a total philosophical battle between 2 sides of governance in this state. And there isn't and a lot of these issues, there cannot be compromise. I'm sorry, if you spend more money than you make, you shouldn't be rewarded by being elected. To me, that's just common sense. And I'm just because it's such a philosophical battle, and I see it, and I continue to read about it, my biggest question is, are there going to be chances for you to directly engage the opposing side and really put the numbers out there? And again, thank you again for tonight.
Well, thank you. And first, where do you teach?
Should I say? No. Cromwell.
Okay. No, that's great. I think I told you my brother's been teaching middle school for over 20 years, and you know, thank you for what you do. look, remember the slide with our spending trajectory, and the fact that the governor's 2-year proposal is 9.64% over 2 years. I think I could say safely that we cannot sustain that over the next 2, 5, 10, 20 years. How do we continue to increase our spending? Our unemployment rate is higher than the national average. We're higher than our neighboring states. We're seeing, and John knows them as well. For the first time, I just turned 49 the other day. For the first time in my life, we're seeing businesses in Connecticut not pick up and go down south, not pick up and go overseas, but pick up and go to Massachusetts and Rhode Island. If that doesn't tell you we've got a problem with spending, I don't know what will. So can we engage them? Yes, we will. We as Republicans will put forward our own budget and our own vision to do that. So why don't we, can I go to this side of the room first, and we'll get Mary Ann, you want to go?
Well, I can stand.
This is actually the first time I'm going to be nervous tonight about a question that's coming.
Okay, first off, I need you to stop saying that Malloy didn't cause this budget problem. He took the helm from the Democrats. This is the Democrats' budget. It's been their budget for 30-plus years. I need it to stop, okay? It may not have been the one that he picked up the day he took office, but he got it from his people.
Absolutely.
Okay, so enough of that. 10 to 15%. There needs to go into that budget on slide 3, and every single person who has a job, who's a manager, like we did in Enfield, we instantaneously, we tell them we want a 10 to 15% cut out of your budget. Come see me when you got it done, because if you don't, I'll do it. Zero-based budgeting. You guys have to stop piling on your silly sand, okay? Let's get back to zero and start the budget clean. You don't do it, all you do is keep piling on more cash on ill-conceived budgets. You come to Enfield, and I'll tell you why. I have these councilmen, both Democrat and Republican, but the Republicans ran this, did a lot of great stuff. You need to come up here and learn how it's done, because what's really important and very upsetting to me is to listen to say, we can't do anything about it. First off, Enfield came in, and I may be incorrect, but Mr. Stokes is here. He was on the Board of Ed. Enfield came forward and said, enough is enough. We are going to figure out a way to get the school board to get good education for our children, but we're going to take away the expense. And we moved buildings and grounds, I'm being generic, over to the town side. The dollars went that way, that we didn't have to go and play around. Jack was very involved in helping look at our audit, and that wasn't going after anybody. It was just going in and seeing, was there really oil in that hole or not? And we looked and found out we had phones that weren't even being used. You need to stop saying, I'm gonna, I will, I should, I want to. Just go do it. Fraud. Remember that snowstorm? And all these folks showed up because their turkeys defrosted. Instead of going out and having a neighborhood feed, we chucked them out. So what happened? A whole bunch of people showed up in Hartford because Mr. Malloy wanted to give away free cash. And we found out, 800 people that were state employees got a handout? I want to know how many should have gone to jail. And if they were caught doing it, how many of the rest of the folks that maybe shouldn't have been there? You didn't see me here. You didn't see these folks here, because you know what? Our insurance company sent you a check because it's covered under your insurance. I didn't need an additional handout from the town to re-put that turkey back in my freezer. You need to go in there and start doing some fraud investigation, and I'm not just talking about that, but I'm sure we can come up with a bunch more. And I'm sorry I'm doing this to you, but...
I'm writing it all down.
Okay. I want to understand how you can borrow, how you really and truly could have the nerve to go in and say, okay, we need to borrow money, we made a mistake, we need more cash, and we're going to retroactive you poor slobs who work every day back to January. You know what? You didn't do your job. You take your paycheck and send it back into the puddle, because I'm telling you, you're killing me. My business is dying. And you know whose fault that is? Mine. I have to get out there and I got to hustle. It's not your fault. You're making my job harder, But you know what? It's my fault. And everybody in this room who showed up tonight, they realize that they're responsible for their lives. And as much as we are annoyed that what you've done up there, and we'll use the proverbial you, okay? You're standing here today having to listen to me being frustrated. And any of you folks who are not involved in town politics, my town committee meets on Thursday. All Republicans, you don't have to be a Republican, play with us. You don't have to be sitting back thinking, I've got no place to have my say. Thursday night in this room, everyone, independent, Democrat, Republican, I don't care if you made up a party, you come by and play with us because we're doing our best to make Enfield the place that'll make you proud. Use your money wisely. And let's see.
Do you need any water? You want
No, I'm thinking on the car tax. John's going, please let her stop. The car tax. I'm sorry. The thing about the car tax that got me frustrated with Governor Rell is the same thing that has me frustrated now. I don't want to have to pay any more taxes. But you guys are so full of baloney when you tell me you're going to send it back up the highway. You don't even know where the Dexter Bridge is now. So you're not going to send it up the highway. It's not going to happen. But you know what? I pay my property taxes because I know I'm giving my kids, and I don't have any, an education. And my potholes are getting filled. And all the other stuff. And my fire department and everybody else is we're doing our job. But you know what? There are folks in this town who the only skin in the game that they have is that small car tax that they pay. I have property here. I came to live in Enfield for the last 33 years with my neighbors, 7 of us on the street. And we pay our taxes and we don't really complain about it because we know Enfield is doing the right thing with them. But I really get ripped off when you're sitting there thinking that these folks who live in apartments, and please don't, I watched it on CTN the other night, tell me how, well, they paid in their rent. You know what, folks? You write that separate check and say that you're jumping it on the street so that we can go out and fill a pothole or your kid can go use the play gym at the school. It means you put skin in the game. Now, that may sound ridiculous from a Republican who hates spending more money than we have to, but the car tax is in the game. Everybody understands how it works, and Malloy is just full of baloney when he says he's going to do what he's doing, because I thought I read that he wants to make a flat car tax, and all the money will go to Hartford. Okay, so I may have picked something up in my little trolling around the internet, but I'm pretty sure there was a bill out there that he talked about a flat tax because Bridgeports and Hartfords and New Havens are inappropriately or
There is. I'll wait till you're finished.
yeah, let's see what else I got.
Anybody got an extra pen?
And I want to know how come governors, and I don't care if it's Malloy or who comes down the pike, if we have a spending cap.
Yep.
If we have a law on the books that says we have a spending cap at X, then you know what? You don't break it. Okay, we're not Washington. We don't go and print dollars in the back room. It's wrong. You were put there by the people of Connecticut. And folks, when you sit there and say, the sir from Cromwell, when you said, why do we send who we send, or why can't we fire who we fire? Well, you had that opportunity in November. And you know what? You sent back people who are just as bad. You need to take responsibility for who you send to Hartford, and you need to not just say, my friend, their guy, I'm doing it. They have to go up there with the understanding they have to cut taxes. So I'm sorry, John has to live with this at the town committee meeting. And I tried really hard not to go early. But Senator McKinney, you need to go up there and start kicking some butt and stop being so worried about hurting people's feelings on being straight up and honest and saying, we're done, we're cutting it, and we're going to do it right.
All right. So first, thank you, and that wasn't as bad as I thought, so I feel much better. You know, and I think the Democrats would probably confirm this. You're talking to two of the least shy people in the entire state Senate. So Senator Kissel and I are oftentimes accused of saying too much. But let me just quickly skip on a couple of things you mentioned. We should do zero-based budgeting, both in our municipalities and as a state. That would get us off of that current services budget, which is everything we wish we could spend. We should absolutely do that. And I think if we had a different governor, we perhaps would do that. With respect to the car tax, there has been a proposal in the past. I don't believe this is Governor Malloy's. That doesn't mean he might not share that vision one day. But there has been a proposal, Representative Berger from the Waterbury area, that would set a statewide mill rate on your car. Look, that's essentially, take the average of whatever the highest mill rates and the lowest mill rates are, come in the middle. What's the mill rate in Enfield right now? It's 23. So if you have a statewide mill rate of 30, guess what? You're now paying more. The problem is, and I know you know this, so I'm preaching to the choir, anytime you have to send money to Hartford to get it back, you're going to lose. That's a bad idea. So I do agree, and sometimes I campaign for office telling people, I'm actually okay with the local property tax, not the state tax. And they look at me like, well, you're crazy. I said, no, because you have control over how that money's spent. You can stand right in front of your Board of Ed and your Board of Finance and your First Selectman, your Board of Selectmen, whatever it has. If you're sending money to Hartford and hoping you're going to get it back, you're not going to see it back again, or you're going to see a penny or two on the dollar. Lastly, no, two more things. Spending cap, yeah, we need to live by the spending cap. And then fraud. You mentioned fraud. And I wanted to end with this because I've been sort of a lonely person in my attempt to pass an office of Inspector General in the state of Connecticut. Governor Rell didn't support it. A lot of my Republican colleagues don't support it, and the Democrats haven't supported it. This is one of the few things, maybe the only thing, that the federal government actually does better than we do in the state. They have an Inspector General's office. They have an Inspector General in each agency of the state government. They have subpoena power, accounting power, oversight, and they can go into a federal government agency and see if they're wasting their money. And by last study, the Inspector General in the United States saved taxpayers billions of dollars annually. It would save taxpayers money in the state of Connecticut. The problem is, some of my own party say, we don't want a new office, it's more government. It is. The Democrats have, quite frankly, opposed it because I think they're afraid that we're going to expose a lot of fraud and abuse in a lot of the programs that they fight for. If we had an Inspector General office, now remember, I mean, we're trying. I understand that sometimes that's not enough, but we're part-time legislators. We have a full-time state agency, government, bureaucracy, and the only one that has full-time oversight is the head of that state executive branch, not the legislature. When we're out in summer breaks, you are safer because we're not passing laws, but we don't have that full-time oversight. I think an Inspector General would cut out millions of dollars, if not tens of millions of dollars of fraud in our state budget. So